I'm going to recess the meeting until a couple of my compatriots get here so we can have a quorum. So if you all will bear with us, this is the County Board of Commissioners workshop, and if you'd all please rise and join me as we honor our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now, if you'd all please join me in a short moment of silence as we think about our first responders and our men and women in uniform overseas. Thank you. Thank you all. Mr. Hadid, now that we have three of us here, can we proceed with the meeting?
Yes, if the board wants to proceed, they may.
Mr. O'Brien, do you have any problems? Should we start?
I agree to that. That's
yeah.
fine. Yes, sir.
Okay, Charlie. All right. Well, today we're going to have this workshop on the airport. So I'm going to ask Mr. Roy Seeger, who's got a presentation for us, to come to the microphone, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Roy Sear, the Airport Director at Flagler Executive Airport. Address is 201 Airport Road, Palm Coast, Florida, 32164. So today we are here, Commissioners, to discuss the Flagler Executive Airport and the airport citizen noise concerns. So I thought it was important before we go into the actual concerns of the citizens, actually give a background on what was actually, where the airport, how the airport came about, and where we are today. I also want to let you gentlemen know as well is that in the audience we do have today, I do have all my airport advisory board members. If you'd please raise your hand. I also have my tower manager here as well, Blaine, and I also have two of my consultants here as well, Jack Thompson and Mike Arnold. Mark Arnold will be giving part of his presentation as well. So just want to let you know that they were in the room if you had any questions for them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so Flagler Executive Airport at the beginning. So that was commissioned in 1942. Originally it was a Bulow Naval Outlying Field. So basically when this field was built for the Navy back in 1942, it was used as a flight training base. As you can see back then, it had 4 runways. And it was actually quite a big base because it had 4 runways and each of those actually had a full parallel taxiway as well. Today we only have 2 runways because the FAA doesn't support more than 2.
That looking south or north, or
that is looking north.
okay.
All right, looking north. Then the airport was transferred from the War Assets Administration to the Flagler County Board of County Commissioners back in February 7th, 1947. And this is how the airport looks today. It's approximately 1,465 acres. We have 3 runways. We have the 1129, which is a 5,500-foot runway. We have the 624, which is a 5,000-foot runway. And we actually, very unique airport, we have our own water runway, which is 1836 water on Gore Lake. So just some facts about the airport. So back in October 2009, we actually built the new air traffic control tower. The airport 3-layer designator changed from XFL to FIN 2004. We changed the name of the airport to Flagler Executive Airport in 2016. One of the largest projects, as you all remember, that we did was relocate and extend the primary runway, which is 1129. That was completed back in 2017. That was like the largest project we ever did at the airport since it was actually built in 1942. And we're very proud. We have an award-winning airport. Back in 2010, we actually received the FDOT General Aviation Project of the Year for the construction of the Air Traffic Control Tower. In 2012, I was named the FAA Airport Director of the Year. In 2015, we received another FDOT General Aviation Project of the Year award for the runway safety improvements. And in 2018, we received the FAA Southern Region General Aviation Airport Safety Award for the relocation and extension of runway 1129. So what's the airport role? So the airport role is, the airport is classified as a public use regional general aviation airport in the FAA's National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, better known as NIPIAS. So I'm not going to read that whole narrative, but I just want to read the first sentence. So the regional general aviation airports support regional economies by connecting communities to the regional and national markets. That's what airport the role of our airport is. So our activity profile. So the airport is currently one of the busiest GA airports in Florida, United States. In 2019, we had 184,429 operations. So in 2019, we were the third busiest FCT tower in Florida. We're the fifth busiest FCT tower in the U.S., and we were the 71st busiest tower in the United States, including FAA towers. We approximately do about 500 operations a day, and the airport accommodates nearly every type of GA aircraft, from corporate jets to single to twin aircraft, rotorcraft, seaplanes, airships, and military aircraft. So this graph right here shows, so like I said earlier, we opened the tower in 2009, but it was only open for 3 months. So the first year that we had our first whole year of tower operations was back in 2010. So in 2010, we had 173,000 and change operations, which that's pretty significant. Why that's so significant is because when we had that first year, we were the busiest contract tower in the nation. So what that really meant to us, we were already busy, not just because we didn't get busy overnight having a tower. The airport, and actually the Board of County Commissioners and the airport saw a need. So we actually, it was quite like 3 or 4 years prior to it actually being completed that we saw that there was a need to build this tower. So also what also is indicated here too, and the lower is the itinerant traffic. That is the traffic that comes in and out from different areas around the local area. The orange part is our local traffic, and the little piece at the top is our military traffic. So one of the things we want to show here too is our annual service volume. So what is annual service volume? It's the most important value that must be computed in order to understand the capacity of general aviation airport. So the annual service volume is a theoretical limit operators on an airport can safely accommodate without delays occurring on a regular basis. So you can see in 2000, this graph comes from our airport master plan, which was completed back in 2015. And our forecast back then, it said in 2018, we were going to do 183,000 operations. Well, we were off about a year, which is pretty good in forecasting. So in 2019, remember we just completed 184,000 operations. So you can see that chart, we're tracking to be at the airport to be at total capacity here probably in the next, within the next 10 years. Next 5 years will be at, next 3 years will be at 84%. So what that represents is the number of total operations that the airfield can support. And so once we get to capacity, then we have to go to the FAA and look at what we need to do in order to accommodate all this traffic. And one of the big ones that we have looked at when we did our airport master plan was actually to build a parallel runway to here. And so people think, well, that's really going to make it busy. But actually, what we would think it would do was actually take some traffic away, possibly from some of the neighborhoods. Basically, it's because having another runway is actually another tool for the air traffic controllers to use. So some more about the airport. So the economic impact. So in 2019, FDOT study estimates the airport generates more than $150 million in economic impact. So basically what they do, they come to the airport, they meet with all the different businesses, they look at how many businesses we have at the airport, how many people are employed at the airport, what the salary ranges are, and they take all that information, they put it into a model, and it comes back, and they've said, and right now at the airport we have 29 businesses and agencies that are currently located at the airport. So on the on-airport impacts is $41 million, visitor spending impacts $35 million, but the multiplier impacts comes to $72 million, with a total of 1,343 employment, total payroll at $48 million, and total output at $150 million. Again, this is a study done by FDOT. The airport plays a very important role in emergency utilization. As you see at this top slide, this top left-hand corner, as we all remember Hurricane Matthew. So we also have an MOU at FPL. So at that point during Hurricane Matthew, we had over 3,000 personnel and 900 vehicles at the airport to get this community back up and running again after the hurricane. We also had a similar layout actually during Hurricane Dorian, but we didn't have to go for a full setup just because luckily it missed us. Fireflight is also a home at the Flagler Executive Airport. We all know where we have that, back in 1998, when the county almost burned down, so we have the Fireflight base there as well. It's also a great location for food and water distribution, as you see in the bottom left-hand corner. In that bottom right-hand corner, that is, like 3 years ago, that is not Afghanistan, that is the Flagler Executive Airport, when we threw in the H-60s. So Fireflight does a great job. That's about a 300-gallon Bambi bucket, but these Black Hawks, they use 800 gallons, so they can get the fires out a little quicker. So that was, so it just shows you another reason why having the airport is so important. We also do a lot of really nice community events. We just, as of Saturday night, we just had a race of the runways for Rotary. It was a great event, and Commissioner O'Brien and his wife were out there running it, and it was a great turnout. We had over 300 runners out there, so it was a great time. We also, many of you know, and you all came out for it too, we do Freedom Fest, the event to salute our veterans, both past and present, and you'll remember that has all the static aircraft and the concerts. It's a great time. It's a free event for our community. So the Operation Capital Investment. So the airport is operationally self-sustaining. So the airport takes no local ad valorem taxes used to operate the airport. So basically at the airport, run it like a business. If we're not making the money, we're not spending the money. The FAA and FDOT provide user-based grant funding support for capital projects. In the past 10 years, the FAA and FDOT have given the Flagler County, the airport, $38 million in projects, for money for the projects. And you know, I currently have nearly $15 million in capital projects currently underway, which y'all know that's the rehab of runway 64 and building the new general aviation terminal facility. The great thing about our relationships with FAA and FDOT is that our capital investment is often as low as 2% when we are matching our monies to those agencies. But with that, when you accept these federal and state grants, we do have grant obligations. The FAA has 39 grant assurances that we need to follow to make sure that we're able to continue to accept these grants. The biggest one I want to talk about here is number 22, which is economic non-discrimination. I just want to read that real quick. It will make the airport available as an airport for public use on reasonable terms and without unjust discrimination to all types, kinds, and classes of aeronautical activities, including commercial aeronautical activities offering service to the public at the airport. The FDOT also has 24 grant assurances as well, and they're very similar to the FAA's. But one important one that I always like to point out is the FAA requires the airport to maintain federal funding eligibility as well. Roles and responsibilities. So the FAA, what's their role? So their role is to direct the safe movement of aircraft in the air and on the ground. Our role in aviation for Flagler County is to manage the airport, improve and maintain airport facilities. We have no control where aircraft fly. We also promote voluntary measures to reduce impacts around the airport, one of which is the Fly Friendly program, and also coordination with the local flight schools. Pilots. The pilots in command has the ultimate responsibility for the safe operation of his or her aircraft. So let's get to why we're really here. So we're here today is because of the community noise concerns. So the primary issues generating comments include the frequency, the altitude of aircraft, the time of day, and location. Noise calls are predominantly related to flight training activity. The majority of the noise calls are generated from the U and Z section of Palm Coast, and these neighborhoods are contiguous to airport property. The diagram that I show there, that is a standard flight pattern for one aircraft. So that's you looking at what the standard flight pattern for runway 64 and 1129. So you can imagine when you have more than one aircraft, it's going to expend that flight pattern out. Matthew?
So what this map shows is parcels and when they were developed. It's kind of going to be hard to see on the screens, but I'll zoom into some of these sections that have been problem areas. Those red dots indicate that we've received a complaint from that resident. If I click on some of those parcels, you can see when when the parcel was built upon. So some of these are between 2000 and 2004, and even sooner than that, even newer than that. up to 2005 to 2009, even some that are brand new, built in 2015, 2016. All these were built with the airport already being there. So this is going to be available online if anyone wants to click through and see. Did you have any particular areas you wanted me to zoom to, Roy?
No, I mean, that's good right there, because that's off the approach in. So where you're seeing that, those areas, these red areas, that's on the approach to runway 6 or the departure and off runway 24. And did you have those one? Yeah, and we also had some over here as well to the east, and that is basically off a runway, the approach end of runway 29 or the departure end of 11 in that area as well. That's good. You can go back to the whole, zoom back out. You gentlemen want to see that back up again? I'm going to keep that diagram up. So one of the things,
We can go back to it, right?
we can go back to it if we need to, right? So I thought one of the interesting things was GIS did a really lot of information on this, and and what they did, they actually looked at a 2-mile radius. Go back to that, please. They went to a 2.5-mile radius outside the airport. So what they found out in that there's 4,298 structures in that area. So it really is like, so they did a lot of homework on this, which was great. So from 1958 to 1984, there was 36 structures built, 5 of which were just single-family homes. It really wasn't until 1999 where we really start seeing a lot of homes being built. I mean, I say a lot more homes, like we start getting into the triple digits. So in 1999, there was 112 buildings built. 6 of those were multifamily, and 100 were single-family homes. So I'm not going to go down this whole litany, but the analysis came out that, and it's actually nearly a perfect bell curve of the buildings in 10 years between 1999 and 2009, when 2,728 single or multifamily homes were built. 63% of all the structures within 2.5 miles of the airport. And then single and multifamily structures, 3,500 total, have been built over the last 20 years and make up 82% of the structures within 2.5 miles of the airport. And then 543 single-family homes, 13% of all structures were built in the last 5 years.
What was that? How many? 35%?
Say that again?
In the last 5 years,
In the last 5 years, 543.
and what was the percentage? And what was the percentage there? You said 35?
13%.
13%. Okay.
At this time, I'm going to let Mike Arnold take over. Mike, if you would come up, please. Mike Arnold, he's one of my consultants for the airport. He works for Environmental Service, ESA. What is the ESA?
Environmental science.
It's science, environmental science. So let me turn it over to Mike and let him go from there. Thanks, Mike.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, I'm Mike Arnold with Environmental Science Associates. We're located at 5401 South Kirkman Road, Suite 475, Orlando, Florida, 32819. Environmental Science Associates is a company that specializes in airport noise and environmental analyses for airports throughout the country. We're working on a variety of high-profile projects that have an interface between communities and airport operations. Sample projects would be the JFK and LaGuardia noise studies that are currently going on. Fort Lauderdale, we're doing a noise study at Naples right now. We've done studies at Kissimmee Airport, New Smyrna. Over 100 noise-related studies in Florida alone related to the to aircraft operations. And one of the big challenges we have in Florida is that interface that occurs between the increases in activity that we see during the peak season here in Florida and the types of activities we enjoy here in Florida, which means you want to have your windows open and be outside and everything else. So that's just one of the dynamics that creates a particular challenge in the airport environment. Roy talked about the opportunity or the ability of the airport to promote voluntary measures. One of the things that he asked me to talk about a little bit was what the process would be to implement formal or more mandatory measures and what that regulatory environment looks like and what opportunities are there that are available. So one of the things I want to talk about is just that noise regulatory environment, and just to help you understand that federal law essentially sets the aircraft noise standards. It prescribes operating rules. It establishes the compatibility planning process, or Part 150 process, which I'm going to explain a little bit more in just a second. It also limits the airport's ability to restrict aircraft operations. As Roy indicated, the federal grant obligations is one of those elements related to that, that ability. State law sets a variety of different planning guidelines that local communities can implement. It also establishes high-level noise standards, but aircraft are exempt from those noise standards. Same with local noise ordinances. Local entities can establish local noise ordinances, but aircraft are exempt. Basically, federal law preempts the state and local ordinances when it comes to aircraft noise. So in looking at things a little bit differently in the regulation relative to airport noise, FAA controls aircraft while in flight. They're responsible for controlling the noise at its source, and they certify aircraft and pilots. Aircraft proprietors, very limited in their ability to implement restrictions. They're primarily responsible for the airport improvements and managing the operation of the airport. Local governments do have a role. They have, when it comes to land use compatibility relative to airports, that's promoting compatible land use planning through zoning, requiring real estate disclosures, doing things like requiring sound insulating building materials or sound level reduction, building standards for developments in certain areas. So those are the types of things that local governments can do in that overall noise regulatory framework. I talked about Part 150, and a lot of times you'll hear airport noise studies, you talk about Part 150, we should do a Part 150. Well, what Part 150 really refers to is the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 14, Part 150, lays out the regulatory guidance for undertaking land use compatibility planning measures related to airports and the surrounding communities. It dates back 40 years, essentially late 70s into the early 80s, and it establishes a federally regulated process that you have to go through. So every airport that undertakes the Part 150 goes through the same process regardless of where they are located in the country, and the same criteria apply regardless of whether it's a general aviation airport or a commercial service airport. So that's an important thing to understand as well. Part 150 studies are voluntary. It's not a mandated requirement that the airport has to undertake one, but it's something that the airport can do to try and improve the compatibility with the surrounding communities. But you have to follow that regulatory process for the measures that come out of that process to be accepted and approved by the FAA. It's a two-phase process. The first phase of the process determines what the baseline noise exposure is. It looks at the noise that's generated by the aircraft operations, how that noise relates to the surrounding community and the noise-sensitive uses in the surrounding community. The second phase of the study looks at a variety of different measures that can be implemented to improve that compatibility. And those fall in three different categories. Noise abatement alternatives, so those would be related to how aircraft fly, where they fly, that type of measure. Land use alternatives, these are the aircraft overlay zones. It could include mitigation, remedial type measures for areas that are impacted by noise. They could be eligible for sun insulation or something to that effect. And then there's programmatic alternatives, and those are things like managing a noise program at the airport, setting up forums for communication with the community through related to noise issues, those types of actions. Essentially two phases that are gone through, and ultimately that's submitted to the FAA for formal approval. I do want to talk about some opportunities and some drawbacks related to the studies, though, because they are fairly limited because of the regulatory factors that kind of come into play. Again, the Part 150 process is really the airport's only formal mechanism to improve the compatibility between the airport and surrounding communities. And by formal, I say it's really the action that results in mandatory measures relative to operation of the airport. But it's got to demonstrate a number of different things, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit in just a second here. Some of the pros of the process are it determines the existing noise exposure, so there's no speculation about what that is. It brings various stakeholders to the table so that the concerns can be expressed, whether that's the community's concerns or other stakeholder concerns. It allows an education process for everybody involved, not just the community, the airport, the aircraft operators, and all. It provides an organized decision-making structure, and it can strengthen community relationships through that outreach process. One of the cons, some of the cons related to the Part 150 process, though, are some of the issues that we deal with here in Florida and some of the things that we're dealing with, particularly with general aviation airports. The seasonal variations in noise exposure are not reflected in the DNL contours. DNL contours look at an annual average day of noise exposure. So it doesn't necessarily reflect what we experience on a cyclical basis. The regulatory process really limits what can be approved. It has to be, the noise exposure has to be above a certain DNL before something can be actually approved formally. Have to demonstrate there's a benefit within that area. It can create unrealistic expectations because the community may think that it's going to solve all the noise problems. Well, anytime we're dealing with airports with a fair amount of community around them, we're going to have interface between the community and aircraft overflights, and it's not going to be there's no solution out there that's going to solve all of the community concerns. And people's sensitivity to noise exposure and aircraft overflights is very different. So some people may feel it's like nails on the chalkboard, every single flight that goes over, and other people may not even notice it. It just blends into the background environment. That's a particular challenge because as we look at the different levels of noise exposure and the annoyance that comes with them, you have differing scales of annoyance that go along with that. A formal Part 150 process takes multiple years. It's not going to be something that solves the community issues right away. It's not going to be able to address some of the things that they would like to see immediately done, right now. And they're fairly costly. There's a lot of public outreach that's part of them. There's a lot of analysis and technical investigation, and there's a fair amount of cost that goes along with that. The positive is that the FAA will pay for the study, but they create a two-phase process. You've got to demonstrate after going through the first phase that you actually have non-compatible uses relative to the noise exposure criteria before they'll allow you to go into that second phase, which looks at solutions. So I alluded to this a little bit, and this is how aircraft noise is actually evaluated. It's evaluated on an annual average day, 24-hour noise exposure level. So it's called a DNL, day-night average sound level, and it looks like at overall noise exposure. It's not something you can actually go outside with a noise monitor and measure. So we use the 65, the FAA uses the 65 DNL contour as the level below which all uses are considered compatible. But if you go out and you measure 65 decibels, it's not the same. The 65 DNL looks at all the activity that occurs on a 24-hour basis. There's a nighttime weighting, so any activity that occurs from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. receives a 10 times penalty, a 10 decibel penalty. Because noise is logarithmic, it means that every nighttime operation counts as 10 daytime operations. So those areas that are exposed to more nighttime flights will have more weighting than those areas that are primarily exposed to daytime flights. The DNL criteria is what the federal government, FAA, and all federal agencies use when considering compatibility relative to aircraft operations. And basically the contour lines themselves, the contours themselves are basically generated for areas of equal noise exposure around an airport. When you go out and measure, the one thing you're doing is measuring the noise at a specific point in time in a specific event. What's really creating a lot of the annoyance in the community are those individual events. It's not necessarily the overall noise levels of exposure. It tends to be a lot more, especially at GA airports, the frequency of events that are occurring relative to that type of activity. In generating DNL and calculating that noise exposure in those contours, we use noise modeling. So the reason we don't use noise monitoring is we'd have to monitor 365 days of activity in a grid that would completely cover the area around the airport to be able to generate those exposure contours. From a modeling standpoint, we can calculate the noise exposure at any point. So we use noise modeling. It's an FAA-developed model that's been in development and refinement for the better part of the last 30 years. The current version is the Aviation Environmental Design Tool, and it allows us to not only model the current conditions noise exposure, but it allows us to model the changes that would occur if certain things were put into place. So if you change runway use, it allows us to predict what that change in aircraft noise would be. It allows us to look at the changing number of operations, the change in the fleet, and how that would influence aircraft exposure and noise exposure over time. So the particular challenge we have when we look at Part 150 in the formal process is that Part 150 really looks at areas of non-compatible use within the 65 DNL contour. So the non-compatible use would be any noise-sensitive use, whether it's residential, places of worship, schools, hospitals, anything that would be considered a noise-sensitive use. And having those uses within the 65 DNL contour, which is the threshold of significance that the FAA has established for determining that essentially once we exceed that level of exposure for that use is no longer considered a compatible use, and we either need to somehow mitigate that use or remove that use and ideally prevent those types of uses being within that contour. One thing we took a look at just to try and get a better understanding of the noise operational environment around the airport was a graphic that you see. This is the noise exposure contours for the environmental assessment that was conducted for the relocation of the north runway. And so you can see that those kind of those magenta lines don't necessarily line up with that north runway because they're actually showing where the noise exposure would be based on the current location of that north runway. The blue lines show the 65 DNL contour. So this is, again, is the area of the contour that the FAA would consider from a significance standpoint to be able to get measures formally approved by the FAA. It's the area that we'd need to show there were non-compatible uses within to be able to have those types of measures approved. You can see that the 65 DNL contour, at least back when this was done for the environmental assessment, largely remained on airport property. I think it extends a little bit to the east off airport property. I think since this actual study was done, the airport has acquired that property. So at this point, these contours completely remain on the on airport property. So how sensitive is that 65 DNL contour to changes? Essentially, a doubling of activity, if it had the same current profile, would result in a 3 DNL increase in operational impact or in the size of the contour. So because it's logarithmic, essentially it would be a 3 DNL increase in the size. If you can get some sense of that, when you look at the difference between the 70 and the 65, we'd see a 3 DNL shift if we doubled activity at the airport. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Roy, who's going to talk about some of the voluntary aspects of what the airport's doing relative to aircraft noise.
Real quick, that blue line, if the airport usage doubled, that blue line would move out.
That
Is that what
blue-
you're saying?
Yeah, if you doubled it, that blue line would move out. But as you noted, or could note from the graphs that Roy showed earlier, the activity levels haven't changed that much from that period of time to now, so. Anything else before and I'm glad to come back up to answer questions when Mr. Seeger's done as well, so.
Just one last question. You said
Sure.
these noise profiles, the 70, 65, based on the current runway where they are now, as opposed to where they show on this picture.
Yeah, so if you can see that the runway doesn't align with that, with those magenta lines on the north side. That's correct, because this was looking at what the future noise exposure would be based on the relocation of the runway to its current
Yeah,
location.
you said, I just wanted to
Yep,
clarify.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so what have we been doing over several years? So the airport recognizes that we are an airport within a community. But again, as we saw here, there's only certain some things that we can do. So one of the things that we did, so the runway 6 was designated as a calm wind runway. We trained a traffic pattern, right-hand traffic pattern to runway 11. We've also asked aircraft to climb as high as possible before leaving airport boundaries, consistent with safety, avoid intersection takeoffs, maintain pattern altitude as long as practical, and use PAPIs on final approach. Keep the patterns as tight as possible. Jets should follow NBAA standard noise abatement departure and arrival procedures or comparable procedure specific to your aircraft manufacturer. And also propeller aircraft should utilize AOPA noise awareness steps.
Roy, what's PAPI?
PAPI are precision approach path indicator lights. So what that does, when the aircraft use those coming in, it puts the aircraft on a 3-degree glide slope coming in. So some of the other things we've been looking at, I also work with my airport advisory board, is potential additional voluntary measures. Again, we're looking at changing the calm wind runway to 11. We're also looking at voluntary limits on training hours. So we'll be going to the flight schools in the area saying, listen, we would like you not to train from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Again, these would be voluntary. We can't tell them they can't. Then also, we put also voluntary limits on training during certain days of the year, holidays as well. And then one of the other measures that we're working on is submitting to make the air traffic control hours, moving them. Currently, our towers open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. We're looking to move them from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Actually, that'll give the tower more control of what's going on. So with that, gentlemen, that is my presentation. Do you have any questions for me right now?
I have one, Roy. In the briefing, it said that the local government can require real estate disclosures. Do we do that here?
No, we do not. So that is one of the problems that we have, if you want to call it a problem, or the situation we're in. As you'll know, the Flagler Executive Airport is an enclave, right? So we are a donut hole in the middle of Palm Coast and Bunnell. So we don't have any, we can't put zoning in. That would have to be done by the city of Palm Coast. Now, we'll tell you, I forget when, I think it was right before I got here, or I finished it up, I think it was 2009, 2010, the city of Palm Coast did do an area master plan around the airport. They did do that.
This way, commissioners. The other? Okay, I think, Roy, when you're finished with the presentation, we'll go to public comment, but I don't want to do that till we're ready to do that. It's up to you, your call.
My presentation's done. Obviously, we'll be here to answer any questions you gentlemen have.
Just to follow up on one thing with what Commissioner Hanson was asking about, or I don't know if it was you, Chairman, about the real estate disclosure. So if there were to be a local ordinance passed requiring that, again, it would have to come from the city of Palm Coast because all the surrounding property is within their jurisdiction.
Correct.
Right. And they master planned for the airport. I remember that. I just don't
Right.
remember the.
Yeah, they call it an area master plan, yeah, correct. And that's when you talk about incompatible land uses, that's actually one of the reasons that when we do a lot of the projects at the airport, especially when we bought, that's when we talked about how I bought that extra property, because we did that to protect the airport. So, because that could be, so we went and put up an apartment building at the end of the runway, we wouldn't want that. So that's why the FAA requires us to go and buy those pieces of property so we don't have any incompatible land uses that would affect the airport operation.
So, I just want to move on if it's time. Okay, we'll move on now to public comment, and normally we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. I believe that we would still be under those rules this meeting. So please, and identify yourself before you start.
Hi, Gina Weiss, Bachelor of Science, RN, Z6. Well, I'm going to have to speak very fast then. On April 15th, the Flagler County Commissioners changed the name of the 70-year-old airport from FCA to Flagler Executive. It was the 5th name change in its history. There was no discussion, no public hearing, no comments by the residents, no invitation for the residents. So why was this? That's number one. The commissioners, as well as Ray Seeger, had an ulterior motive for making the name change without much fanfare. And the clue to the real reason for the name change happened in 2014 when the FAA changed the airport's code identifier from XSFL to KFIN. By dropping the X, the airport would no longer be considered a rural airport. Craig Coffey at the time remarked that we sounded podunk, okay, that there was no zip, there was no flair. But when you look at the airport, when you're driving down, I don't see where it says Flagler Executive Airport. It just meant that it's no longer in a rural community, which meant to the commissioners with the expansion and to Roy, the airport would be more corporate money, there would be more corporate money tenants. Never mentioned to the residents in the surrounding community, the flight school's impact on the community and the environment. The name change was carried out quietly, and it was changed on the commissioner's agenda where numerous matters are approved in bulk. Hold on a second. Flight schools account for 60 to 80% of the local airport traffic and the noise of the touch and goes training. We were maybe noise compatible when we were a small airport, but since then we have become incompatible as a result of the airport's expansions and changes in its operations. The FAA 150 guidelines are the basis for defining areas for potentially eligible federal funding. Noise is measured, as that gentleman had mentioned, in 65 DNLs. Okay, 65 is generally compatible. We have proof that it's way over 65 DNLs. The FAA 150 program, Chapter 4, NCP land use analysis. When an airport operator allows additional incompatible development within an airport's noise impact area, it can result in noise problems for the people living in the area and the results of noise nuisance lawsuits. Public opposition to proposals by the airport operator to expand the airport's capacity, and political pressure for the airport operator and capacity limitations to reduce the noise. Under the Airport Noise Compatibility Planning Program, Part 150 was established by the Aviation Safety Noise Abatement Act of 1979, and the airport operator could have submitted NEMs and NCPs. The airport operator could submit a broad array. I'm going to turn this over to Kelly.
Hi, my name is Kellie Remington. I live at 16 Zinnia Court. So I do just have one quick question because your presentation, Roy, was great, and I'm all for this airport. However, when was the first flight school? When did the flight school first start at Flagler Airport? What year? Yep. You know when?
We'll answer. You need to
Okay.
to give your
So
your
my
full.
my
and
my
then we'll-
concern is the noise. We've done excessive research on this, and the noise from the flight schools produce decibel levels over 90 dBLs, with planes flying over our homes at a rate of 1 per minute. This noise is constant. Excessive research has been done by the National Center for Biotechnology Information, which is part of the National Institute for Health. They have determined by research completed on April of 2017, and I quote, "Noise is defined as unwanted sound. Aircraft noise is one of them. It's not if not one of the most detrimental environmental effects of aviation. It can cause community annoyance, disrupt our sleep, adversely affect academic performance of our children, and could increase the risk of cardiovascular disease for people living within the community of the airport. In some airports, noise constrains air traffic growth. And we also, there was a study completed on July 5th of 2003 by the AOPA Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association that says, I quote, "Around the country, small general aviation airports are closing at a distressing rate, about 1 per week. The usual culprits behind these closures are well-organized homeowners or land-hungry developers. All too often, the impact of aircraft noise on surrounding community is the glue that seals the airport's fate. Even if they don't close an airport, outrun many municipalities in strict noise abatement programs. These serious and fines need to be imposed. And also we have the human element to this and the animal concerns. There's safety issues involved with the constant flight school traffic because of the noise, and also because leaded fuel burned on these planes that constantly fly at 150 feet or less over our homes and neighborhoods. A study completed by the Center of Environmental Health on September 2016 states lead is extremely toxic, and any exposure to lead is dangerous to humans, animals, and our environment. Approximately 50% of lead emissions in the United States is from piston engine aircraft. Once lead is released into the environment, it does not break down. It tends to stick to particles in the soil and settle on the ground. If deposited into soil or water, lead can readily be taken into the tissues of plants and animals. Lead persistence in our environment makes preventing emissions extremely important. No amount of lead exposure is safe for our children."
Thanks. Before we go on to the next speaker, Roy, for your group, would you rather have everyone go through their public comments and then answer questions, or would you like to take some of these in the interim? I'm just afraid if we go through 10 or 12 speakers, it may be hard to remember all the questions that people had. It's up to you, however you want to handle it. That might be the best way to do it, because there were 4 or 5 different questions in that last speaker.
This one. So the one question was about when the flight schools came here. So are you talking about flight schools in general in the local area, or right here at the
County Airport.
I couldn't answer that question. I will tell you the most significant flight school that we can go back to is when CAP program opened up. And that was in 2004. And they had 200 students here. But I also just we looked it up online. You know, it's not just the training aircraft. Let's just go back. The Flagler Executive Airport, and just Florida in general, is a mecca. It's a mecca for flight training in Florida. In 1965, that is when Embry-Riddle moved into this area, 1965. No, I'm saying that's the first significant flight school that I know of, was CAP in 2004. There may have been many other little mom and pop flight schools here that I don't know about.
Okay, just you can answer your question and Roy. I don't want anybody else entering into the discussion. Well, we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait for that. Okay, next person.
Chairman Sullivan and members of the County Commission, my name is Darrell Hickman. I live at 1123 North Ocean Shore, Flagler Beach, and I serve as the chair of the Flagler Executive Airport Advisory Board. I've served on the board since my appointment by the Commission in April of 2018. During my tenure on the board, the subject of airport noise and its effects on residents of the Z and U sections of Palm Coast that surround our airport has been a topic that has periodically appeared and been addressed by members of the advisory board. After a presentation by Mr. Jay Siciliani and his attorney Bonnie Burns at the May 2019 advisory board meeting, members of the board spent many hours of personal time in the affected neighborhoods observing the airport traffic flow, flying the pattern with the tower chief to determine best practices options, creating maps of affected addresses, and personally communicating with affected citizens regarding their concerns. To that end, the Airport Advisory Board dedicated most of our June 2019 meeting to the subject of airport noise and how the airport could best respond in assisting the community members with addressing their concerns. Many suggestions arose from this meeting, among them impose a voluntary no-touch-and-go night curfew starting earlier than the existing, but yet unpublished, policies of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Suggestions including starting at 5 p.m. or 7:30 p.m. and continuing through to 7:30 a.m. These suggested hours were summarily rejected by the airport director in favor of 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The airport director agreed at the meeting on June 6th to communicate this and other discussed policies to area flight schools, but not prior to his leaving on vacation June 12th, which would conclude July 5th. At the time, a well-connected member of the board offered to handle this task, but it was dismissed by the director. The need for this communication was reiterated to the director at both the July 11th and again at the August 8th meetings. To date, the advisory board has received no copy of any correspondence indicating that this communication has, in fact, been communicated to the flight schools. Additionally, at this meeting, the advisory board passed a motion to place signs at the entrances of the runways describing the noise abatement practices for our airport. Although agreed to at the time by the director, as of today, none have been placed. Many airports publish written documents to distribute to transient pilots that describe noise abatement procedures and include a map of noise-sensitive areas. Examples of New Smyrna Beach's plan were distributed at the October meeting. This document was acquired at the FAA Safety Team seminar for pilots, air traffic controllers, and airport managers held on September 2019. This annual event serves as an opportunity for airports to discuss with flight schools and pilots issues of concern regarding both noise and safety. The airport director has not attended the previous 2 years, despite invitations by both the organizer of the event and by me as a member of the Airport Advisory Board. A presentation of this event would have been an excellent opportunity for the Flagler Executive Airport to discuss concerns with area pilots in a relaxed environment. Additionally, members of our advisory board have consulted with airport directors and advisory board members in our surrounding communities regarding their methods and successes in handling noise concerns. Chief among the suggestions recognized to be effective was Ormond Beach Airport's Noise Abatement Task Force. This task force consisted of advisory board members, flight schools, pilot staff, and especially concerned citizens. Subgroups were formed to meet and discuss strategies regarding geographical locations of airport traffic patterns, noise abatement procedures and hours to be effective, and as a method to introduce community members to the inner workings of the airport and flight school operations. Report from Ormond Beach Airport Director Steve Licklider indicated that this proved effective in both developing a positive relationship with the community and reducing noise concerns. Many area airports append their ATIS AWAS, and that's the recorded information that pilots listen to on the radio prior to departures and arrival, with noise abatement announcements and information. At Flagler, we do not employ this tactic. As I run short of my allotted 3 minutes, I close with the firm belief that there is much we can do to improve the situation with our airport neighbors through collaboration and education, but that can only materialize with a mandate from the County Commission to do so. Thank you.
Next. We get this clock started on time. Is that 5 minutes? Is this 5 minutes or 3 minutes? Right. Yeah, okay, good.
Good afternoon. My name is Les Aubin. I serve as the Vice President on the Airport Advisory Board. I live at 114 Seaside Landings Drive, Flagler Beach. First, thank you to Mr. Cameron and the County Commissioners for taking the time to give consideration to the subject of airport noise. As presented by our Airport Advisory Chairman, is a matter that requires careful consideration. It is also a matter that should never have been presented to this governing body. Why? The Airport Advisory Board is tasked with such concerns, but unfortunately the advice offered by members was largely ignored. Had the recommendations been implemented, most likely this workshop would never have been scheduled, nor would your constituents have threatened litigation. Compromise is an important part of negotiation, but in this circumstance, compromise was not forthcoming. Regretfully, the airport noise issue is not the only circumstance whereupon airport advisory recommendations have been ignored or disregarded. Your current airport advisory board members, most of them experienced pilots, include backgrounds as educators, chancellors of universities, high-level executives, airline captains, realtors, and writers. We volunteer our time only for the gratification that our mutual contributions succeed in improving Flagler Executive Airport. Although we have admiration for the accomplishments of the airport director, more can be done to affect daily operations and future revenue. But nothing will be improved if our recommendations are dismissed. The very first paragraph of the the advisory board bylaws read, the Flagler County Board of County Commissioners has established the Airport Advisory Board to assist and make recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners on matters pertaining to the Flagler County Airport. In other words, our membership on the Airport Advisory Board is to function as advisors for you as the county commissioners. If our role has become simply to acknowledge the accomplishments of the airport director, then we serve absolutely no purpose. But that's a decision you as commissioners have to determine. The fact that we are relegated only to the public comment portion of this workshop is a reflection of our effectiveness. Our bylaws are woefully in need of revision. Allow me to leave you with a final concern on a threat to our community that, if not addressed, will have more dire consequences than litigation for noise. For the 10-plus years that a control tower has existed at the airport, the promise of radar has been elusive. Radar has been vehemently advocated by the Airport Advisory Board, but nothing of consequence has occurred. It's time for more than just lip service. Thank you for your valuable time.
Thank you. Next. Oh.
Hi, Barbara Lake, 9 Zarrington Court, Palm Coast.
Somebody may need to assist her.
Okay, well, okay, we've been through this for over 2 years. Everybody in the city now knows the state of my health. My brain is not communicating with the rest of my body. 3 doctors and the physiotherapists have told me to move, but I can't get the house together to move. Okay,
You could have somebody assist you with trying to put those.
yeah, it's something we got at an airport meeting, airport advisory meeting. Thank you, Mr. Aben, for speaking the truth up here, as you have done during the meetings at the advisory council. Okay, I've heard him state that there is no integrity in those meetings, and we all had to quit going because we were being humiliated. I would like to speak about the tower. This is the map, okay? This is my house, right here. Okay, everybody have a real good look. I believe this would be Jay's and Gina's all around over here. This is my house. I am hearing, I'm in bed almost all the time. I hear both sides of the takeoffs. I want to know the list of all the flight schools. I want to know who is the person transmitting the incorrect information to the FAA that we are 6 miles south of Palm Coast. That information comes from how many years ago? Okay, I live 120 feet from your property line, the airport's property line, and this is all wrong. And the towers, it hasn't worked. We just made a copy of your new web pages, and the tower is not on. And we need radar. The people of this county do not know that we don't have radar. Okay, these people are cutting their engines over our homes at night. Last night it was till 9:45, and by 10:30 I finally was able to get out of bed not shaking. This went on. I had guests from South Carolina who came for the weekend, and they came Saturday night, and they heard all this. We tried to sit on the lanai and talk. At 9:30 that night, they said, we're going to be leaving tomorrow morning because they thought it was a disgrace. So that's what has happened to me. And I want some answers and I want some resolution. And it's really important because I'm not going to die in that house because of the airport. Thank you.
Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Blaine Meistrans. I'm the air traffic control manager at the airport. I've been there for 10 years since we opened. I'm the last remaining original controller there. Been the manager for the last 5 years. I didn't really come with a script, but one of the things that I think that the public fails to understand about what's going on, yeah, you can sit here and talk about numbers all day long and how many airplanes are going to be going on, but the one thing that people fail to realize is they talk about the weather. Okay, one of the things that we have to do as air traffic controllers is we have to determine by our instruments which way is the wind blowing, because I can't land and take off airplanes in a crosswind of so many knots. Okay, it's unsafe. So as a result, people come out and they do these studies and where they're going to plan on putting an airport, and they figure out that the winds are going to be coming out of the east, northeast, or the west, or whatever, like in the summertime when we're on runway 29 for the most part, because the thunderstorms come in from the west. People fail to realize that, okay? We have such an influx of traffic is because we're good. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to be, I'll be a little bit egotistical. My team is very good, okay? So airplanes like to come here. I've been in the state of Florida since 1988 working airplanes. When I was in the Navy at NAS Cecil Field, and they were a lot louder and a lot more than what we deal with here. And now I was at NAS Jax. So people fly in Florida because of the weather. It's just like they go out to Arizona and fly because of the weather out there. Okay. Some of the things that we have discussed that I've talked with the airport director is about talking to the flight schools about changing up some of the flight patterns. We do the voluntary noise abatement procedures till about 7:30 Monday through Saturday, 7:30 in the morning. I'm sorry, I'm talking. Okay. And then on weekends, after one of the incidents that we had with one of the flight schools that just absolutely killing the pattern, we've moved it to 9 o'clock on Sundays, and we don't fly the pattern on holidays. Okay, so we're trying to work with the public. Just because they don't hear anything doesn't mean that actions aren't being taken. We had things going on with the Navy. My time might go over just to explain this stuff, but so I got a hold of the Navy with the helicopters, and we've limited their flight path over to can stay within the constraints of the airport to not bother the public. Okay, I've talked with the airport director, we've talked to the flight schools in Daytona, Embry-Riddle, Phoenix East, ATP, with them about trying to do something with the...
Finish up in a minute since you have specific...
Sir?
Finish up, you can have one more minute.
Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. So I've talked to them about trying to really conform, but there's other things that are going on. Pilots need night landings for their training. It's going to happen. I think if we go to the flight schools and that we've talked about with the airport director and say, okay, you've really got to maintain this flight restriction from 10 o'clock at night until 7 o'clock in the morning. It's got to be done. I think that'll be beneficial. But just to say that nothing's being done is incorrect, because we have been trying to interact with the flight schools, and it's not just flight schools, but it's the general public as well about what goes on here. This airport was busy before I got here. When I was with the FAA for 2 years, and they said, hey, you want to go to the busiest non-controlled airport in the state of Florida? And I said, yeah, that's what we do, right? So it was busy before I got here. That was 10 years ago. So to say that things have changed, I don't think so. And I could go on, but my time is up, and I got to go work some airplanes. So y'all have a nice day.
Thank you. Next.
Gina Weiss, C-section. I appreciate what you said.
Tina, you'll have to go at least after everybody else has
Oh,
a
okay.
chance. You've already had one turn, so Let's
Okay.
let everybody else have a turn.
I was just going to say, we can't let the winds decide on our lives.
Good afternoon, Jane Gentile, Plantation Bay. I'm actually here today at the request of my husband, Mark Yude, who has 50 years in the industry, starting when he was 16 years old in Bristol, England, working on the Concorde. He now drives 70 miles each way every day and got his engineering degree and is working on a NASA project with Northrop Grumman, and he worked on the Endeavour, on Shuttle Endeavour. He also worked for the many years we lived in Dade County at Miami and Fort Lauderdale Airport. They do not have flight schools at those airports. He also worked at Broward County Executive Airport, which is kind of like in Davie. FBOs. Can I ask through the chair if Mr. Seeger knows what an FBO is?
He'll answer. You have to go ahead and finish.
FBO is called a flight-based operator. This is where corporate jets that have all the safety equipment that these piss-ass puddle jumpers do not have. They have all the radar, they have the crash control systems for mountains, etc. They don't fly in and out of crazy hours. They fly their corporate jets in where they have fixed base operators, which is where they do their maintenance of the corporate jets. The revenue to Flagler County would be far greater, and none of these companies would send their corporate jets in for maintenance at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they certainly don't do ups and goes and downs and outs. I have not heard one suggestion from the airport director, and I should go to the meetings because I feel so sorry that these people on the advisory board are treated like garbage and not their recommendations. Get rid of the flight schools, bring in FBOs so people can sleep, so there'll be corporate jets coming in the daytime and not doing touch and goes and flying in and flying out after their maintenance is done, and let's live like a human organization. I'm sick of the flight schools. There are a disgrace when you have people living around them, and Roy Seeger needs to be fired.
No applause, please. Next.
J. Siciliani, 16 Zinnia Court. We all agree that the airport is an asset to our community, and it's not the general aviation planes flying in, it is the flight schools that are causing this problem. And it just needs to be controlled. I have a I have a study done by the AOPA on January 10th of 2019, and I quote, 240 fatal instructional accidents in piston engine airplanes from the year 2000 to 2015 concludes that the greatest risk in flight training are loss of control during flight and mid-air collisions, end quote. And these are the fatal accidents. They're not, any other accidents that did not involve fatalities. And after an interview by the Palm Coast Observer with Blaine Maesterhans, I believe it is, who is one of the flight controllers at the airport, states, and I quote, "The hardest part that we have here is because there is so much training, there's guys reporting 180 degrees off from where they're at. So a guy will tell me, well, I'm coming in from the southeast, and he's actually to the northwest. Or pilots will move to line up at the wrong runway. The airport doesn't have radar, so controllers use their knowledge of local of landmarks to guide planes in. He says I-95 way station is 3 miles northeast, the water tower in Manila is 3 miles northwest, the Flagler Pier is 4 miles east, end quote. That's a little unnerving to me for some reason. And I spoke to Ms. Santiago from FAA, and she stated that FAA has nothing to do with the airport unless there is a fatal accident or a safety concern. She told me that the airport manager is supposed to control all flights in and out of the airport. Now, he may not be able to control them up in the air, but he's able to control the flight time and schedule when they're leaving the runway. 7 in the morning till 10 at night is 15 hours of flights. And it's 7, and I have a recording here, 7 minutes long with 7 airplanes. That's a plane a minute going over our homes. And this is constant, day and night. I have night videos, and I do have decibel readings. I don't care what they say. I recorded a decibel reading of 92. Normal conversation is 65 decibels, 60 to 65. So when we're sitting out in the lanai trying to enjoy whatever we want to do, talk, we get drowned out by these planes.
Right, thank you. Next.
My name is Ann McAvoy. I live at 9 LeBerry Pass. Our issue is not with the airport. We support the airport. My husband and I have been to many of these free events. I've been on the airport tour a couple times with a bunch of ladies. Our issue is not with this airport. In fact, we used to live in Syracuse, New York, just a few miles from Hancock Airport. Much, much bigger airport than this little airport. And there was never an issue, except when our country's jets went up during 9/11. That was loud. But we do have a problem when we can't hold a conversation with someone in our front yard. We have a problem when we can't hear the TV or have a phone conversation inside our home without getting up to shut the door first. That's a problem. What we're asking is for just cooperation with the powers that be, with the citizens that live with this issue day in, day out. The issue is with the flight schools, not the airport. That's my story.
Thank you. Next.
Yes, my name is Corey Gowan, and I've lived at 11 Zinnia Court since June 2004. Like most here, the flight schools are what I consider to be the sole problem at the airport. The corporate jets, they're over in about 5 seconds. They don't bother me at all. General aviation, not a problem. It's these flight schools of people taking off and doing touch and goes. They take off and they can't get back to that runway fast enough to get in the maximum number of takeoffs and landings that they can. My solutions to the problem at the airport is regulate or eliminate touch and go operations, regulate or eliminate evening and weekend operations and holidays. 3, enforce a vigorous noise abatement program. Whatever needs to be done to make it mandatory should be done. And most important, in conjunction with that air traffic control tower guy, the weather does play a huge factor. Most important, change the designated calm wind runway to be split up evenly. 25% for all 4 runway possibilities, 11, 29, 6, 24. When wind is calm, all runways are equally usable. This divides the airport burden equally and fairly. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, my name is Nancy Becker, 30 Cashmere Trail. I just wanted to call to your attention that
none of the charts or diagrams that you've been showing indicates that this noise is a problem on Kashmir and in the K section, which is where we live. And I'm here to tell you that it very much is. I can be out in my yard, and actually, I think if I were writing on the planes, I could read it. They come so low over our home, and I can hear them constantly. I can hear them with the windows closed and the television on. Lay in bed, 10, 12 o'clock at night, I hear planes going over. So it really is a disturbing issue, and I hope that you do something to address it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Kim Carney, Flagler Beach. I am a proud realtor here in Flagler County, and I took a customer out on Friday afternoon. You know, when you pre-qualify your customer, you want to make sure that you know the criteria and what type of homes they're looking for. So we picked 3 to look at Friday, F section, Z section, and P section. And I did not need to disclose that we had an airport nearby, because during a 10-minute viewing or showing of a house in the Z section, it was over, and there were 3 aircraft en route somewhere, landing, taking off, I don't know. I did not have to disclose, and my customer just went bilateral on a contract for a house that was $15,000 more with the same criteria. As a realtor, I would always point out the airport as a point of interest in Flagler County. But as far as the noise, I don't need to disclose that. It's very obvious when you're out there showing property. This is not about not in my backyard, gentlemen. It is about your obligation to health, safety, and welfare. As a city official in Flagler Beach, it is our duty to make sure that the properties of our homeowners and our citizens is not changed, not that it's not changed, that it's ruined. So I'm not offering my services. There are a gazillion brokers out there that would do a much better job than myself. If you look at those sections in Palm Coast, the home values are less than other sections of Palm Coast with the exact same criteria for purchase. As a public official, if you can prove that there are home values decreased because of what your citizens are telling you, it is incumbent upon you to do something about it. Does your master plan for the county match the master plan for the airport? Is 500 operations a day acceptable and needed in our community, in our county? So anyway, I just wanted to talk about the real estate aspect, and please do what's best for the public and match your needs in the community with the needs of the people of your community. Thanks.
Good afternoon, George Mayo, Palm Coast. I live in the Z section. Having spoken to Mr. Seeger one time, I said, sometimes I can definitely tell that planes are landing too low. And he said, if you can read the numbers on the planes, write it down and call the airport, which I have done, and they said, okay. Another time, I was in my backyard, and I looked up and saw a plane, which is not unusual, but then looking directly above it, another plane flying at a 90-degree angle flew over top of this plane. I'm not a pilot, but I don't think that is something that should happen if one plane crosses directly over top of another. I called the airport and got a lady answered, and I said, I don't think this should happen, but I just saw a plane, and she chuckled and said, okay, and that's all I got. I've complained to you before about the UH-60 military helicopters at times flying so low that the house vibrates. You could put your hand on the windows, and the windows vibrate. The airport director here said they have talked to the Navy about it, and I hope that is fixing that situation. What seems most damning to me right now, listening to all this, and I knew there was an airport. I'm not complaining about the airport. It's not a NIMBY situation with me. I understand that. But to have these people here, airport directors or the advisory committee, come and tell us that they are being ignored, they're being pushed to the wayside. The county is always saying, we're looking for volunteers for this advisory committee, that advisory committee. Well, you have people who are willing to dedicate their time and make suggestions, and to hear that they're being ignored. But yet, the director of the Ormond Beach Airport is very receptive and willing to talk to the board and operators and everything else. Seems that to me that I would hope that your board, the county commissioners, would sit together with the board members of the advisory board and the airport director and try and solve these things out. It sounds like what's being done in Ormond Beach can be done here and would probably, more than likely, help the situation tremendously. We can't fix everything. Federal rules prohibit us from doing a lot of things that we would like to do, and I understand that. But it seems, after hearing the testimony of the advisory board, that we can be doing a lot more that would alleviate the situation tremendously. So please, I know everybody's busy, everybody has time constraints, but that's why you are county commissioners. These people are giving up their time. I'm sure they'd be willing to sit down and talk to you, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is David Faust. I live on Utah Place, Palm Coast. Mr. Chairman, councilors, fellow citizens, I just had a couple of questions. Wanted to bring up a couple of comments from what I've heard thus far. We mentioned no intersection takeoffs. Is a touch and go considered an intersection takeoff? Because these guys are not landing on the numbers; they're landing halfway down the runway. That's one of my questions. If our flight schools are going to be good partners and good neighbors, shouldn't they be taking the onus of regulating themselves? I mean, that's their responsibility. Can we limit the number of touch and go takeoffs? If they're hitting halfway down the runway and popping off, and it's not a limited number, it's not 4 times. A lot of these schools are coming in 12, 14, 16 touch and goes sequentially. So, I mean, these folks are hearing 6 planes doing multiple touch and goes for hours on end. I can really feel for them. The lead flight instructor from Embry-Riddle came up several weeks ago, and they actually measured what the planes are coming off of runway 6, heading out over the coast. And when they come over to Business Park at Pinnacles, they're 200 to 300 feet off the ground. Just for comparison, fire hydrants within a city are 300 to 500 feet apart. So if you're standing on your street and you can see the next hydrant, planes are way closer to the ground than those hydrants are apart. You know, all the complaints seem to be coming off of the U section, the Z section, predominantly off the runway 624. If we move to having the common runway 11 and 29, that alleviates a lot of problems for these folks right here. Majority of our planes are right here off of that runway. Redesignating calm wind runway will definitely help. And I've sat in on a lot of the advisory board meetings, and the folks are doing a great job. They're very empathetic to our concerns, and they've been quite helpful thus far. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next. There's no one else.
Okay, there's a question I would like to ask of Roy. Roy, did you ever submit any MENs, M's, or NCPs to the FAA voluntarily? That's the first question. And I just want to summarize. The neighboring residents, again, we were never informed about the impact of the flight school, soaring over our heads. And here's another thing I'd like to address. Who monitors Flagler County's natural areas? On a website, I saw that Flagler County's objective is to make the best kind of acquisition and management decisions to preserve and conserve the natural areas for future generations. So we're also looking at the aircraft disturbances upon wildlife and overflights to our park system, the physiological and behavioral responses of wildlife, observed responses for various species, and the effects such as accidental injuries, reproductive and energy losses, habitat avoidance and abandonment, and the animal responses to aircraft. So I was wondering if there was any studies done on that, on the impact. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to end the public comments at this point. There's a number of issues that have come up. I'm going to go back to our county administrator at this point. There's no agenda exactly how to proceed at this point. I've written down some items that I think maybe are worth further review, but I don't want to be the only one stating that, and maybe Mr. Seeger may have some answers to some of the questions that people brought up. I don't know. So I'm just trying to look a little guidance here on our workshop as to where we go from here.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I would suggest that Mr. Seeger and some of his resources he has with him answer the questions that can be answered in these chambers. And then we would take a list of questions that need research before answer and bring those answers back to the board.
I'd be willing to at least go down the list I wrote down, and if the other commissioners want to add anything they can. I know that one of the big questions has been either an actual radar or radar repeaters for the tower. I kind of am interested in the real estate information question, hours of operation, flight patterns, board responsibility, and flight schools. Those were the items that I picked up as we went through. Does any of the other commissioners want to add anything to that?
Yeah, the recommendations from the advisory board to the airport manager.
Yeah, I said
Did you
board,
get that?
yeah,
I'm sorry.
board. And anything else? Okay, does that?
Okay, good
Okay.
start. All right. You want, Commissioner,
you
go
want me
ahead and
to
just,
radar? One
go
was-
ahead, go your first one.
Okay. No, just go ahead on.
No, I don't remember what you said, so I just want you to
Okay,
ask
let
me
me
the
go
question.
down through them again.
Yes.
The radar repeaters.
Radar, okay. So for many, many years, we've been trying to get radar at the Flagler Executive Airport. And just recently, I've had emails go back. I mean, they came back here 10 years ago, and we opened the tower. They said we're going to get radar within a year. It's never happened. We've been working on that for many years. And the last few years, we've been told, you're in the waterfall, you're getting it. So still never happened. I think it was last year, I actually was able to had Congressman Waltz come out to the airport and gave him a tour of the airport. We went up to the tower, showed him where we were at, and I told him about the radar. He did step in to help us out with that. As a matter of fact, got some attention with the FAA, and they actually sent down a team a couple months later and actually came out and did a survey and said, yes, you guys qualify, and basically, but we don't have any budget for you for this for the next 4 or 5 years, and if you want to pay it for yourself in the next 2 to 3 years, you could buy it yourself at a cost of $1.1 million. So I didn't find that, didn't sit well with me. So we actually had a meeting just recently as well with some of the other stakeholders, Embry-Riddle, and sat down with them. They have some very influential lobbyists up in D.C. Sat down with them, as well as with the tower manager from Daytona, our tower manager, and the gentleman that's in charge, Mr. Burns at Embry-Riddle with the flight program over there. Anyhow, so we actually put down a letter requesting their assistance to the lobbyist. Matter of fact, the lobbyist has pretty high places there. They actually had lunch with members of the White House staff, and they thought it was prudent that we do have radar, and they were bringing that directly to bringing this to the attention of the FAA administrator. I don't know how much higher I can go than that.
The next thing that I brought up was the real estate information based on what we were told from our ESA gentleman's briefing. Apparently, I'm the only one that is too worried about that, but my feeling is that 2-mile radius circle would be a good start to try and maybe do something on that. I don't think it should be just one real estate person might mention it to somebody, another one might not. My gut feeling is, without any final to it, is maybe a 2-mile radius. If you're going to sell a house within 2 miles of the airport, it's a requirement that you let people know that where the airport is and so on. But I think that's more of a question for the city of Palm
Correct.
Coast.
That would be something, I know you all meet sometimes, correct? You have joint meetings? I mean, it would be something you brought up between the commissioners regarding that?
On hours, my only question is, one of the things that flight schools and anybody who's learning to fly has to do is do some night operations in order to qualify. And so my thought was maybe the hours could be adjusted. I hate to say this, for daylight saving time, summer versus winter. In wintertime, it gets darker a lot earlier. Maybe you could restrict something. I don't want to give an answer. Just maybe on the hours, there could be some way to provide some relief in that area without really damaging anything. I don't know, just your thought on hours.
No, so what we talked about, so you are correct. So when these, majority of these students are just learning to fly, right? They're getting their pilot's license, some advanced training as well. So part of that training is that you are required to do nighttime cross countries and nighttime landings. So that those things have to be accomplished.
Flight patterns, that depends on the runways, and we are finishing up one of the runways right now, so you'll have full operation on both here?
Well, both of them are fully operational right now. Currently, we're just in design right now to rehab runway 624. Both runways are open right now.
Can that affect the patterns?
Well, that will affect the pattern. Once we go under construction runway 624 will be closed. So the only runway we'll be utilizing at that time will be runway 1129, and there will be a portion during that construction as well that we will actually shut the entire airport down for, I don't exactly know how long yet, but probably two
I'm not going to
weeks.
say, on the last two, I'm just going to mention the last two, and then you can talk about them. One is your interaction with the board, and then the other is the, just in general, talking about flight schools and their pros and cons of having them at the airport, I guess.
Well, I will admit I was a bit surprised on some of the comments that were from Mr. Hickman. I thought I was working well with my airport advisory board. Apparently I'm not. Matter of fact, I even sat down with him to show him this presentation, asked if he had anything to add or if he would be standing up to speak, and he said no. I was kind of surprised. So you can imagine my surprise. Anyhow, to that end, I do listen to my airport advisory board. I listen. That doesn't necessarily mean that I take all of their recommendations. You gentlemen have asked me to be the airport director, and I have done so for the past 11 years. And I thought I've done a very good job with that and brought a lot to this airport, a lot to this community, a lot of economic development as well. So with that, I'm always open to hear any recommendation anybody has, but also to that end, I have a very small staff, so sometimes I have to prioritize the things that I do. Not that I'm saying that they're any less important than others, but there's almost so much time of the day, and I do what I can. So also to talk about flight schools, we talked about in that in the grant assurances, the obligations. We cannot tell people that you cannot come and have a flight school at our airport. We cannot refuse any aeronautical activity at our airport. That is all through the grant assurances. Now, and I don't think you all want to go here, but we could, all right? I mean, if you don't want to accept any more grants, then you would have to follow that. But then you'd have to give back for the last 20 years all that money. So I don't think you want to do that either. I think you'll all see that the airport is a very viable economic engine to this community. So we cannot tell a flight school, like I said, if they want to open a flight school, they can. Right now, I mean, we would have let's say a big flight school want to come, say we want to come and build a huge flight school, we're going to bring in 400 students. Well, at that point, we probably would have, we would tell them, we don't know we could accommodate that because that is way too many, it's going to put us over capacity until maybe we got the second parallel runway. So those are the different options that we would have. Also, one of the things that we talked about, they talked about New Smyrna and also Orem Beach. The key to those airports is that they do not have the community so close to the airport. They have corridors that they're able to use that we don't have. I mean, these communities are right at the end of the runway. So there is no corridors that we could make them fly around to get into. Now, the other one I did say, and I was going to talk to Blaine about, is actually that when we do straight ins for runway 6, that they're not making turns over the community, that they come in over the wetlands and then straight over. But it's still, at the end of the day, those aircraft are going right over the aircraft. Matter of fact, during our meeting, Mr. Hickman told me that he actually flew the Pappies, and coming on runway 6, that they are, when you're at a perfect 3 degrees, they are 275 feet above the houses coming into land at runway 624. Is that correct? Thank you.
Okay, at this point, any of the commissioners have any additional?
Yeah, Roy, is it possible to set, I understand the rules that you can't tell you can't fly, but have you sat down with bring all those flight school owners and Embry-Riddle in for a meeting and just say, look, you guys are going to ruin a good thing here. If you like flying out of our airport, please do the following. And give them a piece of paper. This is what I want you to do. Please do this, or we're going to lose it. You're going to lose your ability to fly here. And that's kind of an idle threat, I understand, but it ought to be made, you know.
Well, one of the things that we did to Fly Friendly, I did send a letter out. I think it's going to be 2 years now that I sent a letter about talking about the different no touch and go traffic at nighttime. There was some other procedures in there. I just can't remember off the top of my head. But again, it was just reminding them that our airport is, right in the middle of a neighborhood. And one of the things that I had, like I said, was working with the Airport Advisory Board. I sent them some comments, what I was looking at doing, and then they sent some back to me as well. Have I got them back out yet? No, I have not. Actually, I was waiting, once this came up, I was waiting to see what the outcome of this meeting was. But these are some of the things that we, as I said, I put in this presentation of things that we are looking at implementing.
Well, I think that part of your job is to make yourself a nuisance to those flight schools. I mean, just be in their shorts all the time. Mm-hmm. You guys aren't following the rules. Please follow the rules. And I mean, if you got to contact those guys every month, don't let them forget that we're not happy.
Right.
Okay. Don't let them forget.
And one of the things, once we came out with again, we can only call them voluntary noise abatement procedures.
But keep in their knickers,
At this point, I just want to, any more questions from the commission? Then I'll get back to, did you have anything else to say? Okay. What I wanted to say, Roy, I think you've answered the questions that I had brought up. The question really is, where do we go from here? I don't want to have another full public go, but I think it's, since you mentioned specifically your board director, or board president, that we should be able to hear from him for a couple of minutes, just to respond to what you said. So,
okay. Thank you for the time. I'd like to address a few things that Mr. Seeger said. First of all, New Smyrna Beach Airport has Bear Creek subdivision right next to it, and they're the #1 complainer of noises. So to insinuate that only our airport has close neighbors is not correct. As far as the Fly Friendly brochure, this is a joke. The only place you can find this is on the Flagler County website. Transient pilots are not given it. It has not been distributed to the flight schools because I've asked. And if you look at this Fly Friendly brochure that is on our website, it says nothing about any nighttime voluntary curfew. And if you talk to as we have done, if you talk to the airport manager at New Smyrna, they worked with Embry-Riddle, and according to Steve Licklater, the airport director, after they had their task force that included citizens, Embry-Riddle incorporated those procedures into their flight manual. Okay, we have not done any of that, and we have not been specific with those. And 2 weeks ago, I sent each and every commissioner sample noise abatement policies that I gathered on my time from airports that have similar problems that we do. We have done very little in the form of education. And everything I mentioned in my 3 minutes earlier, you can find in advisory board minute meeting notes where there have been conflict between what we've recommended and what the response has been, and what has been told that was going to get done and what hasn't been done. So that's all in public minutes. The only thing I mentioned earlier was the task force at New Smyrna, but in that Thursday meeting with Mr. Seeger, I mentioned to that, and he said that would be a total waste of time.
Okay.
So there
All
you
right,
go.
with that, I'm going to bring it back to the board. This is a workshop. This is a workshop, and we're not going to, as far as I can tell, there's nothing specific we can vote on if we want to go to a second meeting, like sometimes we do if we had a specific action to vote on. At this point, back to Mr. Cameron, it's where do we go from here? We've had the meeting. We've heard a pretty thorough discussion of some of the problems some of our citizens have, but I don't think we're at the point other than to say we should continue to look at maybe some improvements we can make at the airport, but that we have to obey the rules, and it's not an easy thing to say, well, we're not going to fly at this time or something like that. We need to think it through. So I just kind of get some idea what you think, where we can go from here. As I say, I don't think we have anything specific we can vote on, but if somebody feels different.
Yeah, I think we as a commission should give the sense to Mr. Cameron that we need a noise abatement plan from the airport and a list of things that can be done that his advisory board has put together, and start down the path to see get some of those things done that we could do, understanding that you're not going to close down flight schools, but they need to cooperate.
Well, I certainly agree that we need to, as a result of this meeting and the issues that have been brought forward, that we need to develop a plan to address how we are going to take our position with regard to noise abatement, and that takes into consideration all of the pros and cons of not complying with FAA rules that are in place if we want to secure grants. The other thing I think would be beneficial is to develop the disclosure ordinance, even though it's not our ordinance, and then move to Palm Coast to get them to adopt such an ordinance. Disclosure is very important. There once was a concept that was followed caveat emptor, and that has been largely replaced by government disclosures and government management of issues that would face a buyer. Home values are definitely affected by location. It's no question that homes located further out of town are generally cheaper. Homes that are located on the beach are more expensive, on the intercoastal are more expensive. If it's by a landfill or a busy intersection, maybe cheaper. If it's by an airport, certainly that's a consideration that eliminates a lot of potential buyers, and consequently the land values would be lower. But people that are looking for property are entitled to know that their property values may be affected and their quality of life may be affected in those homes. So I would suggest that we follow that, and we develop a model protocols to bring back before the board.
Okay. With that, so basically we're going to follow up with items that were brought up at this workshop to see if we can't come up with some actions that will improve the situation on noise. I don't know what else to say at this point. Should we make any recommendation here by the commissioners as far as along those lines, to say that we are in agreement that the staff and the airport director and I guess the board participate in that effort and see where we get to. I don't know what else to say.
Well, I think we need a plan. We need to put a plan together.
Right. So is there concurrence on the board that such a plan be developed? I'll start with
Certainly. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Joe?
I'm just want to make sure that we don't do anything that puts us in jeopardy with some of the funding we got. I know we've got an issue here and a problem, but I think we need to really look at it. It's easy as a commissioner to sit up here and say, let's force this ordinance or let's force that, but the money that has been taken and the responsibility that we have needs to be evaluated very closely. This isn't a small problem here. This is, it's affecting many people, but to jump in it and do something drastically that cost us some of these grants or cost us some of payback.
Well, nobody's suggesting that. Nobody has said anything about that.
I can play back. That's what you said.
No, I
That's
said
what
we need a plan. We can't jeopardize the funding. We cannot stop the flight schools from operating, but we need to have a plan to go to them and encourage them to follow our
And I
noise
don't want to
abatement
move
rules.
hasty with it. All right.
Well, that's why we're not making any decisions today. We're saying to follow up, though. Mr. O'Brien? Yeah, and that would be my feeling. If we do this intelligently and logically, I think we'll ensure that the airport will continue to be one of the great business meccas, actually, for the county, and then I think we can accomplish both goals of making the airport work better and give our citizens some relief from the noise. So with that, I'm going to ask to close the meeting.
Recommend we adjourn.
Thank you.